The snow fell soft that morning, like ash drifting down from some forgotten fire in the sky. It coated the earth in silence, hiding the scars of hoofprints and old wagon ruts. The wind had quieted to a breath, and the trees stood still as if they, too, were listening for something. From the white lay of the land came a broken line, red, thin as thread, winding through the frost like a trail left by something wounded trying to remember how to live. Along that line, barely a shadow in the blue light of morning, staggered a woman. She wore white once, a dress meant for Sundays or a wedding, though now it clung damp and torn to her legs, its lace muddied, its hem stiff with blood. Her shawl was missing. Her boots were cracked. One hand clutched her swollen belly. The other dragged a length of torn muslin she must have pressed to her side when the pain started hours ago. No one should be out here. No one except ghosts and the desperate. She moved without seeing, more dream than woman now. Her lips were split, and her breaths came shallow and fast, white clouds spilling from them like prayers half finished. The frost bit at her hair, clinging to the black strands that framed her too young face. She looked no older than 19. The wind whispered her name once, though not a soul heard it, and she fell. Down she went at the edge of a fence, its rails half buried in snow, its gate tied with rusted wire. Her body hit the drift without sound, her eyes closing as if sleep had come to take her final. Stillness followed. Not even a hawk stirred overhead. But from the hills above, where smoke curled from a lone chimney beneath the cottonwoods, a man watched the land the way men do who've learned to live by reading it. He saw the crows circle once, slow and wide. That was enough. He didn't saddle a horse, didn't run, just pulled on his coat, rough worn and waxed to dark sheen, and walked with that same steady step he'd used every day since silence became his truest friend. His boots broke through the crusted snow. His breath misted in the air, but he paid no mind to the cold. He walked the fence line until he saw her there, crumpled like dropped linen, barely moving, skin pale with the look of something slipping. She didn't raise her head, only moaned low in her throat when he knelt beside her. Her hand moved, slow as molasses, toward her belly. He saw then the blood. Not a wound to the outside. No bullet hole, no blade. But something inside her giving way. Time running thin. He didn't ask who she was. Didn't ask what she was doing this far from the wagon road, dressed in bridal white and half dead from cold. He didn't ask because he already knew. Some stories don't need to be told out loud. She tried to speak, but her teeth chattered too hard for words. Her lips formed the start of something, maybe a name, maybe a plea, but only a small sound came out, brittle and wet. He reached beneath her carefully. She was light, the way hunger makes people light. He could feel the shape of her ribs. The round weight of the unborn she carried felt too large for her frame. It was a miracle she'd made it this far. She didn't resist when he lifted her. Her head dropped against his shoulder, breath warm for a moment on his throat. He carried her through the trees, past the barn with its sun-warped slats, and the empty chicken coop half buried in snow. The dog didn't bark. The dog never did, not since the fire years back. Just watched from under the porch with eyes that knew loss. Inside the cabin, he laid her down on the cot beside the fire, pulled the wool blankets up to her chin. The wood stove clicked as it warmed. Somewhere outside, a mourning dove called once, soft and low, as if even the birds were afraid to wake the dead. She slept, if sleep is what you can call it. Her skin was ice where he touched her wrist, but her pulse still fluttered there, weak and stubborn. He sat across the room, didn't pace, didn't pray, just waited. Hours passed. The wind shifted. The fire dropped low and was fed again. The room smelled of cedar smoke and old bread and the leather oil he used on his boots. When her eyes finally opened again, it was dusk. The color of the sky outside the small window had turned bruised violet, and the lamp beside her gave off a gold hush that lit the room like a memory. She blinked once, tried to rise. He stood and moved slowly toward her, hands visible, unthreatening. She flinched when he reached for the tin cup, so he paused and set it down instead on the little table beside her. Her lips parted. Still no voice came. Instead, she looked at him, truly looked, and he saw the fear behind her exhaustion. The kind of fear not born from one night in the snow, but a lifetime of being told what she was worth and who she belonged to. He nodded, slow and quiet, and stepped back. Let her breathe. Let her see the fire. The dog asleep near the door. The window shut tight against the wind. The quilt pulled snug. The water close. She didn't ask where she was. Didn't ask who he was. Just lay back again, and her breath evened out by degrees. He picked up the kettle and poured another cup, then set it beside the first. She wouldn't drink it now, but maybe later. As he stepped outside to chop more wood before the cold deepened again, he glanced back once. The woman was sleeping, and in her sleep, her hand rested on the curve of her belly, not in pain now, but in protection. The first stars were coming out. The wind had changed just slightly, warmer now. From the edge of the porch, the rancher looked out across the snow-draped world and whispered to no one, "You're not gone yet." And, behind him, the fire kept burning. The wind sang low beneath the eaves of the cabin, tugging gentle at the corners of the world, as if unsure whether winter had overstayed its welcome. Inside, the woman woke to the scent of pine smoke and coffee, the kind boiled and blackened tin over quiet flames. She stirred, not fully rising, only blinking against the morning light that crept across the ceiling beams like a hesitant hand. The warmth was the first thing she noticed, real warmth, not the cruel heat of fever, but something solid and steady, a hearth well kept. The second was silence, not the dreadful kind that follows betrayal or pain, but the kind that lives inside safe places, where no one needs to shout to be heard. Her hand touched her stomach before anything else. The child moved, a flutter like wings against her ribs. Alive. She drew in a shuddering breath. The quilt that covered her was thick and worn to softness, smelling faintly of cedar and horses. Her dress had been folded neatly over a chair nearby, stains dark but dried. She was wearing a man's shirt now, sleeves rolled, buttons done crooked by hands that had tried to be respectful. There was water in a tin bowl, a comb, a bar of yellow soap, everything done with care. And still, she kept her body low and her eyes toward the door, not yet ready to believe in kindness. The man came in after a time, arms full of split wood, boots crunching faint against the pine plank floor. He didn't startle at seeing her awake, didn't speak, just moved with a quiet rhythm, placing the wood near the hearth, wiping his palms on his coat before kneeling to stoke the fire. She watched him, tried to place his age. Mid-40s, maybe. Not young, not old. Shoulders wide, but not cruel. His hair was dark, touched with gray at the edges, and his eyes, when he finally glanced her way, were the soft brown of old leather left too long in the sun. Not warm, not cold, just used to carrying weight. He nodded once. She gripped the quilt tighter. Still he said nothing, just stood slowly and walked to the stove, lifting the kettle and pouring something into a second tin cup. Steam rose. He placed it on the table beside her, careful not to come too close, then returned to his chair by the window. Only then did she notice the paper. A note had been placed beside the cup, its edges square and neat, written in a slow, deliberate hand. Rest easy. You're safe. No name. No question. Just that. She stared at it longer than the words deserved. Safe. How long had it been since she believed that? She sat up with effort, bones stiff as fence posts. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the cup. Warm broth. Salted. The kind that stitched strength back into a person without asking for thanks. She drank slowly. The man didn't look at her while she did. Outside, the dog rose from under the porch, gave one bark, and lay back down again. Somewhere in the barn, a horse stomped and snorted. The day unfolded with the small, steady movements of a place not waiting on anyone's permission. She spoke first, voice cracked from disuse. How far from the wagon road? The man looked at her, not sharply, not surprised. Half a day walking. His voice was low, textured like riverbed stones. He said no more. She tried again. How long have I been here? He stirred the fire with an iron poker. 2 nights. Her eyes flicked toward the window. You live alone? He nodded once. She wanted to ask why. Why he'd carried her in. Why he'd stripped the blood from her dress and not touched her like the others had. Why there was warmth and quiet instead of chains and shouting. But she didn't. Because somehow, she knew the answer wouldn't come from words. Instead, she said, "I won't stay long." The man leaned back in his chair, elbows on his knees. Thoughtful. "You can leave when you're strong enough." And there it was, no claim, no questions, no commands. Only the kind of patience that held a wounded horse still while it learned how to trust again. That afternoon, she stood on unsteady legs, leaning on the doorframe to watch him work. He was out by the fence, mending a post that had split in the cold. His motions were slow, exact. He didn't waste effort, didn't hurry. The dog lay nearby, tail flicking in the snow. She said nothing, just stood holding the wall until he turned toward her and lifted a hand. Half wave, half sign of recognition. Then he bent back to the post. She stepped outside the next morning, the cold stinging her skin like old memories. The sun was higher now, melting edges of frost. The land stretched out wide around the little ranch. Fields gone gold beneath the snow, trees bowed beneath weeks of weather. She felt small inside it, but not invisible. He was chopping wood again, splitting logs with clean, practiced swings. The axe rose and fell like it belonged to him, like his hands had learned it before they learned to shake. "Can I help?" she asked. He paused, looked at her, tilted his head slightly, then nodded toward the stacked kindling by the porch. She gathered it with numb fingers. He didn't correct her, didn't hover, just let her be useful. That night, she sat near the fire and sewed the torn hem of her dress, her needle catching in stiff, blood-crusted fabric. He sanded a length of wood across the room, quiet, rhythmic. A long, curved piece. She didn't ask what it was for. Only when he stepped outside and left the door ajar did she rise to look. A cradle sideboard half-carved. Animals curled into the grain. A fox, a doe, something like a bird. Gentle shapes. The work of a man who took his time. She went back to the fire before he returned. In the following days, they spoke little, but said much in silence. She began to notice things, the way he moved slow when close to her, never raising his hand suddenly. How he always left extra food on the stove, as if not assuming she'd eat but hoping she would. The way he left books within reach and firewood stacked twice as high. One evening, when snow began again, she asked, "Why did you take me in?" He didn't answer at once, just leaned back in his chair, looking at the dancing light on the ceiling, and said, "Seemed wrong to leave you to the snow." She watched him a long time, searching his face for more, but he didn't offer it, didn't need to. The next morning, before the sun fully rose, she found him in the barn brushing the horse, murmuring low words in its ear. There was another shape behind him, covered in canvas. She reached out, touched the edge. The unfinished cradle. Her breath caught. She looked at the man, standing so still beside the horse. He did not turn, did not speak. He waited for her to speak first. And this time she didn't. She only reached down, placed a hand on her belly, and for the first time in weeks, smiled. Just slightly. Outside, the snow had softened. Spring wasn't here yet, but it was thinking about it. The days passed like whispers, each one a little softer than the last. The snow melted in slow confessions along the edges of the eaves. Mud gathered in patches where the sunlight lingered longer now. It was not quite spring, but the land had begun remembering how to warm. She found herself in rhythm, not because she was told to, but because something inside her unfurled when given space. She swept the porch without being asked. She boiled water while he chopped wood. She hung damp linens between two crooked posts, letting them snap in the wind like flags of survival. The ranch didn't demand her labor. It simply accepted it. The man, whose name she still hadn't asked, moved with that same quiet steadiness. He mended the hinges on the barn door, patched a leak in the roof above her cot, took long walks into the trees with the dog, always returning with something useful. Bark for kindling. Sprigs of early mint. Once, a feather with the tip still blue from sky. He never watched her too long, never let his gaze turn into claim. It unsettled her at first, how he asked for nothing. Not her story. Not her name. Not even her thanks. As if her presence was not a debt to be tallied, but simply allowed. She sat by the fire one night, her ankles propped on a stool, belly rising beneath the quilt like a small hill against the horizon of her body. He was near the stove, humming low, a song she didn't recognize but felt she'd heard long ago, maybe in childhood, maybe in a dream. She asked, "You ever had children?" The question hung in the air like smoke that didn't rise. He stirred the pot on the stove before answering. No. A pause. Then quieter. Not that lived. She didn't push. She knew that kind of silence. The kind that held names too painful to say aloud. She only nodded, folding the answer into the invisible place where her own losses slept. Later that night, when she stepped outside to breathe, the moon was a low coin between the trees. She wrapped his coat around her, sleeves too long, scent warm like old pine and saddle leather. The dog followed her, sat beside her in the hush. She whispered to no one. Her name would have been Miriam. The name carried no echo, just drifted upward, disappearing into stars. The next morning, she found the man sitting on the porch steps, whittling. A shape was taking form in the wood, rough yet tender, a bird with its wings folded, not ready to fly, but already carved mid-song. She sat beside him, close enough to feel the heat of his shoulder, far enough that the space between them still felt safe. "You're good at that," she said. He shrugged. "Takes time." "Everything does." He looked at her then. Not long, but long enough for her to see that he understood what she meant. Not just the carving, not the healing, but the everything of it. Life, trust, wanting something again after you've been taught to stop. That afternoon, she gathered courage like kindling piece by piece. "My husband," she began, though she wasn't sure why she needed to say it. Maybe to name the thing that still dragged at her chest. He didn't interrupt. He wasn't cruel at first. Just cold. Just disappointed that I wasn't a boy, or a man, or a better wife. The man listened, hands still. He said we'd have a place. A life. But when the others came, friends of his, other settlers, they made jokes when I got heavy with the baby. Called me useless in winter. Said I ate too much and did too little. Like I was livestock. Her voice cracked. She hated how small it sounded. One morning, they said they were going to trade for salt. Asked me to ride with them. I didn't want to, but I went. She looked down at her hands. They left me at the edge of the ridge. Said they'd be back by sunset. She paused. They didn't come back. Still, the man said nothing. Only placed another log on the fire, careful not to let it crash. I walked until I couldn't. I thought maybe I'd sleep in the snow. Let the cold take me before the pain did. She met his eyes, finally. But you came. His jaw worked, like there was something he wanted to say, but didn't have words ready enough. "I didn't think I'd want to live again," she whispered. "I didn't think I'd know how to help anyone again," he said, almost too low to hear. They sat in the quiet that followed, as natural as wind and branches. Days turned gentler. Her belly ached less. Her steps grew steadier. The baby kicked stronger now, a fighter like her mother. At night, she spoke soft words to the child. Hopes, not promises, while he listened from the chair across the room, pretending not to. She never called the ranch home. But she didn't call it a stop on the road either. He never asked her to stay. But he moved the cot closer to the fire and built a shelf near the stove where she could keep her things. One morning, she woke to find a fresh bucket of river water by the door and a folded cloth resting on top. Not placed, offered. She touched it like it was something sacred. That afternoon, she returned to the barn, following the sound of carving. The cradle was nearly finished now. Polished, sturdy, carved in curves that made it seem more grown from the earth than built by hands. She saw her own likeness in one of the figures, barely, subtly, a woman with long hair sitting beside a fox. No eyes carved, just the shape. But it was her. He didn't notice her watching. Or maybe he did. She didn't speak. Didn't need to. He sanded the final edge, blew dust from a corner, and placed his hand to the wood like someone offering prayer. The snow began again that evening, soft and aimless. They sat by the fire, Two chairs pulled close now. Her knitting something uneven. His hands resting quiet on his knees. The silence between them no longer a wall, but something warmer. Like a blanket passed back and forth without words. She looked at him then. Truly looked. He didn't flinch under it. Her voice came slow. "Will you be here when it's time?" He met her gaze, steady as ever. "Yes." She smiled just barely. Relief so deep it trembled. And outside, beneath the snow, the land kept thawing. The days had stretched long and kind, holding her like the quiet after a storm. Her hands had grown more certain, her steps firmer. The cradle by the hearth stood ready now, smoothed and oiled, lined with soft fabric she'd sewn herself. She'd begun humming again, faint and unsure, songs she half remembered from girlhood, songs meant to hush babies and memories both. The rancher didn't comment when he heard her. He only paused in whatever he was doing and let the sound fill the room. But peace, like spring, is often interrupted. They arrived without warning. Just before noon, when the sun hung directly above the cottonwoods, and the air was clear enough to see the shimmer of ice melting on the ridge. She'd been in the garden patch, pulling weeds that had returned too early, and he had been checking the fence. It started with the wind changing, sharp, the way it does before men come carrying bad intentions. Then the dog barked just once. She turned and saw the horses first. 4 of them. Their riders cutting dark shapes against the brightness, dust rising at their heels. They rode with the entitled ease of men who thought they were owed something. Her breath caught. She dropped the trowel. He saw them at the same moment, walked up beside her and looked. His face didn't change. Not much ever did. But he said, low and quiet, "Go inside." She hesitated. "Go," he repeated, softer this time. "I won't let them take you." So she did. She watched from behind the window curtain, heart hammering. The porch boards groaned under the weight of their boots as they dismounted, full of noise and grins that didn't reach their eyes. She recognized them all. The first, her husband, wore a coat he hadn't owned when he left her. New. Fine. As if winter had treated him gently while she bled in the snow. His hair was longer, his eyes harder. But he still looked the same to her, small beneath all that swagger. The second was taller, a man who laughed too easily and drank too fast. The third, silent, with a shotgun across his back. The fourth, a boy barely 20, who looked nervous beneath his bravado. "Well," her husband said, stepping up to the porch, "look what the wind dragged in. This the place she ran off to." The rancher didn't answer. He stood between them and the door, arms at his sides, unarmed but unshaken. "I came to collect my wife," the man continued, louder now for show. "Reckon she's had her little tantrum." Inside, she clenched the edge of the windowsill. "I found her near dead," the rancher said, his voice calm. "She didn't run. She was left." The tall man chuckled. "And you're saying we just forgot her out there?" She says different. Her husband scoffed. "You believe every woman who cries wolf? She's fragile. Always was. Gets confused. Prone to fits." The rancher took a step forward, not aggressive, just enough to break the line of performance. "She's carrying a child." "That's my child," the husband said quickly. The rancher didn't blink. "You sure about that?" The silence that followed was cold as sleet. Then the boy muttered, "Maybe we should come back later." But the husband wasn't listening. His pride was burning too hot. "She belongs to me," he snapped. "Paper says so. Marriage done legal." The rancher's voice stayed even. "You left her in the snow. That makes paper worthless." There was a pause, long and thick. Then the third man, the quiet one, shifted slightly, hand resting on his belt. The rancher didn't reach for anything, didn't move, but something in his stillness spoke louder than guns ever could. He said, "You walk away now, you leave whole." Inside, she pressed her palm to her belly. The baby kicked once, sharp and alive. She thought of the cradle, of the way this place smelled of cedar and fresh bread, of hands that had never struck, of silence that felt safe. Her husband's voice rose. "She's mine." "No," she whispered, to herself this time. "I never was." The rancher spoke once more. "You walk away." The tall one hesitated, then grabbed the boy by the collar. "Let's go." But the husband didn't move. "She'll come back," he said, his tone fraying. "She always does." "She won't," the rancher answered, without anger. Just certainty. And something in those words, the finality of them, the fact that no fight came after, made the man falter. He turned, face red, eyes flaring with insult. "She'll regret it." The rancher didn't reply. They rode off in a storm of muttered curses and trampled snow. No shots fired. No threats repeated. But she knew it wasn't finished. Not yet. The rancher came inside without a word. He set his hat on the hook, stoked the fire, then turned toward her, eyes checking for wounds the way only someone who's known loss does. She nodded. Just once. He exhaled slowly and went back to work. Later, when the light faded and the wind picked up again, she sat beside the cradle and ran her fingers over its edge. Her mind replayed the porch, the men, the stillness. "You knew they'd come," she said quietly. He didn't look up from the stove. "I hoped they wouldn't," he replied. "But I was ready if they did." "Why?" "Because you're not something to give back." She felt something break and bloom inside her all at once. The child shifted, a soft weight against her ribs. Life, insisting itself into the world again. She sat there long after the lamps were lit and the doors locked. And outside, the snow began to fall again, slow and soft, as if the earth were trying to cover every wound that had ever been made. The wind had softened into birdsong by the time labor began. No warning, no drama. Just a dull ache that bent her forward while hanging linens, then deepened until she could no longer stand. She gripped the porch rail, breath snagging in her throat, a soundless cry forming. The cradle sat by the hearth now, polished, waiting. The child, too, seemed ready, moving less, holding tension like a secret. The rancher was mending a hinge on the back gate when he heard the shout. Not loud, not panicked, just sharp and certain. He dropped the hammer without thought, found her kneeling in the doorway, sweat already beginning to bead along her brow, eyes wide with a mixture of pain and something deeper. Not fear, not quite, but the knowledge of crossing through something that could not be undone. He didn't speak, only lifted her gently, carried her inside. She clung to him once, just once, and he held her closer for it. The room had already been made ready. The cot, fresh sheeted, towels folded, water warming on the stove. She remembered how he'd prepared quietly over the past weeks, never saying what for. He'd simply made space, as if he believed in her survival, before she did. The storm arrived as the child did, thunder crawling across the hills like a beast dragging its belly. Lightning lit the window pane, casting white shadows across the wood floor. She cried out once, long and low, and the dog whimpered under the table. Then silence, a sharp, shattering silence. Then the sound of crying, new and bright. The rancher wrapped the baby in flannel, hands surprisingly sure, though they trembled afterward. He handed the child to her, not anyone else, because this was her moment, her victory. She looked at the baby, a girl with hair dark and wild, mouth opening like she was ready to argue with the world already. "I named her," she whispered. "Miriam." He flinched, just barely, as if touched by something too sacred to hold. She rested the child against her chest, heartbeat meeting heartbeat, their rhythms finally one. He stepped away then, giving her space again, but his eyes lingered on them both like he'd waited a lifetime just to witness this. The cradle in the barn had been brought in while she slept. It sat near the hearth now, lined with soft blue cloth, a carved bird perched at the headboard. But she didn't lay the baby in it yet, not that night. The child slept in her arms until dawn. The world should have stayed still after that, should have stayed soft and gold and full of breathless beginnings. But peace is a fragile thing. It must be guarded. The second arrival came 2 days later. One rider only, her husband. She saw him from the kitchen window, striding up the path like he still owned it. He had no men with him now, no swagger either. Just a rifle slung too casually over his shoulder and something dark in his eyes, the kind of darkness that grows in men who cannot stand to lose what they once dismissed. She stepped outside before the rancher could. She held Miriam in her arms. Her husband stopped when he saw her. "You look well," he said. "Better than you should." She said nothing. He glanced toward the door. "He's not here, is he?" "I don't need him to stand in front of me," she answered, voice low. The rifle remained on his shoulder. He took a step closer. "That child's mine." She looked down at Miriam, who stirred against her chest, sighing like wind in tall grass. "No," she said softly. "She's mine." His jaw tightened. "You're coming back with me." "No," she repeated, and this time her voice didn't shake. "I won't. I'm your husband. You left me to die." "That wasn't my idea," he snapped. The others said. "I don't care." He stared at her like he didn't recognize her. And maybe he didn't. She was no longer the girl he'd brought west like a purchase. No longer the girl who whispered apologies with every breath. This woman stood on her own porch, feet planted, child in arms, back straight. He shifted his weight. His hand brushed the strap of the rifle. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. Behind her, the door creaked open. The rancher stepped out, coat unbuttoned, hands empty. The dog growled low behind his boots. Her husband hesitated. "I could drag her off," he said, almost himself. "You won't," the rancher said. The man's hand hovered a breath too long near the stock of the rifle. "I should have finished it," he muttered. "Should have made sure she stayed dead." In one motion, the rancher crossed the distance between them. Not with fists, not with fury, with stillness. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't draw a weapon. He just stood close, close enough that the man saw the years behind his eyes, the loss, the weight, the kind of sorrow that makes a man unafraid of bullies or bullets. "She lives now," the rancher said. "And you'll leave." Her husband's mouth twitched. A lesser man would have pulled the trigger. But this one saw something colder than death in the rancher's stare. A man who had nothing left to lose fights hard. But a man who has something to protect fights harder. The rifle lowered. The man spat into the dirt. "You'll regret this." The rancher didn't answer. The rider mounted up, turned without another word, and disappeared into the trees. He didn't return again. When the dust settled, she felt her knees weaken. The rancher moved to her side, not to catch her, but to stand with her. She turned to him, and for the first time, placed Miriam into his arms. He took the child like she was made of breath. And for a long, silent moment, the three of them stood on the porch as the wind passed through the cottonwoods. Later, as evening came and the sun melted into gold, she laid Miriam into the cradle. The little girl turned once, sighed, and settled. The carving at the headboard, the bird, the fox, the sleeping woman, gleamed in the firelight. The cradle didn't creak. It rocked with the ease of something that belonged. She sat beside it, brushing her fingers along the wood. "She's home," she said. The rancher stood nearby, arms folded, eyes soft. "You both are." And outside, the world did not end in fire or fury or blood. It ended in quiet, in wood smoke, in a cradle that no longer waited.